Hey there Jedi Masters, Knights, and Younglings! Welcome to Which Lightsaber Form, the video series where I take the role of a Jedi Blade Master, evaluating characters from different franchises and deciding which lightsaber forms suit them best. Today, I will be examining the fighting style of Noctis Caelum, the King of Lucis from Final Fantasy XV. First, let's look at Shi-Cho, the most basic of all lightsaber forms. Often taught to younglings, but when mastered, an incredible tool in open combat. Because of the nature of Noctis and his abilities, much of this analysis will stem around not only his fighting style, but his weaponry. For those unfamiliar with the character in his video game, he has magic which allows him to conjure several weapons from his arsenal, almost instantly. In short, the weapons he used were closely linked to his unique style. For example, one aspect of Shi-Cho is its ability to manage large crowds with its wide, sweeping slashes, which is very much akin to Noctis and his use of great swords against large groups. A second quality of Shi-Cho was its raw and wild sensibilities, which don't quite align with the laid-back nature of Noctis. If I were his Jedi Blade Master, I would not consider Noctis a suitable student for the form. In the world of EOS, that type of style was more suited to greatswords, a weapon I feel is a better match for his Kingsguard, Gladio, rather than the king himself. Second, we have Makashi, the Fencer's form, perhaps the most disciplined of all lightsaber forms. Less about bombarding your foe with heavy cleaves, or overwhelming them with quick slashes, but outmatching their tempo, momentum, and timing. For Noctis, his use of the polearm has the closest interaction with Makashi. As described in the official strategy guide for the game, polearms are best confronted with a measure of skillful anticipation. For a Form 2 practitioner, economy of motion and positioning was of the utmost importance. Whenever Noctis applied his polearms into combat, he often employed stabbing sequences similar to that of a Form 2 fencer. Even when using his standard swords, he made use of deft jabs to stab through his opponent's defenses. As a Blade Master, I would definitely encourage the use of the form, as it more closely aligns with Noct's physicality and his more nimble fighting style, but I would make sure that he would not slack off with his tempo fighting, as it requires patience and attention to detail when he was a bit headstrong and nonchalant in combat. Third, we have SURESU, the defensive form, designed to be an impenetrable defense against any enemy that is coming at you with everything they have, whether by way of a blaster or a lightsaber. This is the one form I think has no real correlation with Noctis. Yes, he can and does use shields, but again, I do not feel this really aligns with his character, and more with Gladio. Also, Noctis loves following up his blocks with counters, even with shields, which relates more to another lightsaber form, not SURESU. As a Jedi Master watching Noctis, I would not recommend he pursue the tenets of SURESU, but judging by his acrobatic antics, I would encourage. Fourth is Ataru, the acrobatic form, marked by its elaborate movements and its energetic blade sequences. Swords, warp strikes, daggers,
say your prayers,
phasing, and polearms. All of these to me scream Ataru. Ataru specialists were all about augmenting their physical abilities with the Force, and many of Noct's weapons were designed to do the same thing through phasing. His use of swords and polearms were coupled with airstep attacks, something unique only to Noctis. The airstep ability allowed Noctis to begin and sustain attack combinations in mid-air, highly effective against flying enemies. But more so, the combinations flowed from one to the other seamlessly, something very similar to Ataru's technique of flowing water. Form 4 users lacked for effective blade-to-blade defenses, so they adopted a lot of dodges and somersaults to evade their opponent, similar to Noct's ability to phase. And when taking the fight on the offensive, Ataru users attempt to blitz their opponent by subverting their flanks, which relates to Noct's warp strikes, whether as a stray strike or a flanking maneuver, depending on the environment. As a side note, this could also relate to the sub-discipline of lightsaber combat known as Soken, which taught the importance of using the environment as an ally. As a lightsaber instructor, I would advise Noctis to use the form, even electing to have him take specific training under a dedicated Ataru master. Fifth, we have Shien and Jimso, the Perseverance forms, characterized by fluid counterattacks, taking your opponent's strikes and returning them in kind. The gameplay of Final Fantasy XV is riddled with quick-time events. and those quick time events are related to parry and counter, which is exactly what Form 5 is all about. But I should note that Nox's use of Form 5 is more akin to an early Anakin Skywalker or Starkiller, in the sense that he uses more speed-based counters rather than strength-based counters. Form 5 Gem So is noted for his strength-based countering, used for Force users who can effectively empower their muscles, like a Darth Vader. In terms of lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat, Form 5 is traditionally a flat-footed and grounded style, but the philosophy of parry and riposte was a staple for Noctis. As a battlemaster, I would encourage the tenets of Form 5 to Noctis, but discourage his more rooted and strength-based variants. I would not recommend it as a dedicated study, but more as a supplement, as Noctis already does. Next we have Numan, the moderation form, the most balanced of all other lightsaber forms. It's not exactly the most powerful or the fastest form, but it's perhaps the most useful in a variety of situations. On the surface, Noctis definitely looks like a Numan specialist. He quite literally fits the definition of a jack of all trades, utilizing just about every weapon and style available throughout his world. And through gameplay, he effortlessly changes from one weapon to the next, sometimes in between his combinations. The only criticism I have of Noctis and his use of Numan is the key term of moderation. For the Jedi, Form 6 was a culmination of Jedi discipline, a harmony between physical lightsaber combat and metaphysical force abilities, a balance between passive and active defenses and attack. Nox's use of Form 6 would probably be less in line with a Jedi Master like Sindralig, and more akin to a Sith Master like Exar Kun. But where Kun was active in the way he used his style, exploiting the unorthodox through Trikata or various weapons, Noctis was a bit more straightforward. Yes, Noctis did use several weapons, each suited for the needs of the moment, but usually at the advice of his friends, or the spirits of the kings, rather than his own accord. It's often the strategy of the group for Noctis to go in head first, while they pick up the slack.
Nocto, 最初から全力だ。衝撃で半数を潰す。陽動を頼むがいいか。
了解。
In terms of application, Noctis definitely holds similarities with Form 6, but in terms of philosophy, he was not exactly the poster boy for the discipline. As a lightsaber instructor, I would definitely try to instill the teachings of Numan, as the style would certainly elevate Nox's ability, and considering his preferences, I would match him more with a master more like Kun, rather than Dralig. 7th we have Juyo and VAAPAD, the ferocity forms, identified by erratic and strong movesets. It was essentially the jazz of lightsaber combat, seemingly awkward, but totally controlled. Generally, it was banned from being taught to the Jedi, and celebrated by the Sith because it required deep wells of passion. I think there is one element of Nox's abilities which align almost perfectly with Form 7, and that's his armature mechanic. It can only be used by those of royal blood, allowing all of Nox's movements to become warps, and his strikes to become far more powerful. The focus of Form 7 is singular, which is largely the point of the armature ability. In the game, it allows Noctis to take on enemies which usually would only be suited for the group, pulling from the spirits of previous kings. But much like Form 7, this mechanic can only be used for so long, as it is very taxing on the user. Juyo and VAAPAD were also noted for their atypical sequences, which correlate to Noctis and his constant phasing, his opponent never sure where he might attack from. This aspect of the form certainly aligns closely with Nox's approach to combat in the armature setting. As a Blade Master, I would recognize Nox's natural affinity for the style, but I would err on the side of caution with my recommendation, as Noctis could get carried away and leave himself with nothing to fall back on when using the style. And as we've seen from the Omen trailer, Noctis does not do so well with such primal, misguided, and unabated power. Nox's current style would be an Ataru, Numan, and Juyo hybrid, with sprinkles of Makashi and a supplement of Shien. This would all really be under the umbrella of Numan, with heavy tendencies toward the more aggressive approaches of Ataru and Juyo, based around his variety of weapons and his tenacity to use them. As his battlemaster, I would recommend he pursue more of the philosophies of Numan, using Ataru and Juyo more as finishers, rather than opening gambits. For example, I would advise the use of Makashi as an opening, using his polearms to assess and gauge his opponent. Then he can transition to the quick counters of Shien, then into the more abrasive approaches of Ataru and Juyo. As a final examination, based on the last moments of the game, Noctis seems to have adapted a hybrid of Ataru and Juyo against Arden. The 10 years Noctis spent in the astral realm allowed him to truly master and harness his power, a style geared for mobility and ferocity, more than moderation. Of course, this is all my opinion, based on the lore of Star Wars and Final Fantasy XV. Do you agree that Noctis would have become an Ataru/Juyo specialist, or do you believe he holds a different combination? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, peace, love, may the Force be with you, and Kupo.